Welcome to the Community Immunity series. I really hope you enjoy this selection of hand-picked people that I've chosen to interview to share with you their knowledge and their insights about how you can navigate through these times with physical resilience, with emotional calm. Make sure that you're subscribed so you get notifications of when each interview is being released. Take advantage of it while it's up for the 24 hours. And just know, of course, that if you want access to all of the recordings forever, then you can purchase the package as well. So without further ado, let's dive in and enjoy. Okay, thanks so much, Daniel, for being on this call. Really excited to dive in and hear what you have to say, to share with the community. Maybe to start this off, well, what do you feel is most important for people right now to think, to feel, as we're moving through this pandemic, as we hear more and more of the news reports and everything coming at us, what it seems like by the hour.
Yeah, it is by the hour. Yeah, definitely. Except for Sunday, right? Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. It's like Friday afternoon hits and I kind of get really, I feel gratitude for the end of the news cycle. And then by Monday morning, I'm kind of like, well, what's the latest? First, let me just say hi to your community, and just haven't been to Calgary area in a while to speak or talk to your folks for some time. So it's good to kind of be back. And I think the number one thing, we were just talking about it before we started recording, which is this idea of chop wood, carry water. It means so much to me. I really embrace that phrase for a lot of different reasons. But ultimately you got to show up each day and do the same things to take care of yourself every day. So, people being like, well, what are you doing for, herbal protocols, or what are you doing for nutrition protocols, or, to get through this? And it's like the same thing that I always do. Yeah. There's always emerging viral and bacterial threats. They're around us all the time. Why would I be doing something different now? I mean, certainly there are sanitation protocols and things like that I'm taking more seriously, but as far as how I'm living, chop wood, carry water. Another way to say that is like, okay, well, how then shall we live? You can lay out all this stuff and it's like, okay, but like, how do I live? And so, it's going about my day to day. But that said, I think that this is a really big opportunity for a lot of people to do a big assessment on their own personal life and how they live. And in the same way that a fire drill will expose weaknesses in a plan. So it's like the school has this thing they've talked about, let's say, of like, okay, well, if we have a fire, the alarms go off, here's what we're going to do with all the kids. Sounds great. Let's run the drill. Okay, we run the drill and we realize we lost 30 kids. This classroom never heard the alarms. They're stuck over in that room. These guys couldn't get out that door because it's locked. Oh God, all these problems emerge and it feels like, oh no, we had a big breakdown. But that's good because it highlights where the weaknesses in the system are. So I think for a lot of people, they're realizing, like, for instance, I think a lot of people want to make fun of people who bought toilet paper till they run out of toilet paper. And then they're like, oh, weakness in my system. Why is everybody panic buying food? There's nothing on the shelves. That's so dumb. And then they have nothing in their stores, right? Or, you and I have talked a lot over the years and worked together a lot on gold and silver stuff. Mm-hmm. And, ha ha ha, you guys are so crazy. Those things just lose money and they just sit there. Nobody can eat gold. It's like, yeah. And then what happens when something like this happens, that's where the money runs. And now there is none available. So I don't think it's healthy to live like you're a fugitive all the time, or like it's always some impending crisis, right? It's a balance. But I think that most people are living too much like this can always just go on infinitely, like infinite growth will work somehow. And I do know people on the more prepper and preparedness side who live, I said live like fugitives because they literally do. Yeah. Like as if the government's reading all their messages and always looking to put them in a FEMA camp. That's not healthy either, right? Talk about.
Oh, we lost you for a sec here.
I'm back.
Oh, there you go. You're back. Yeah. So yeah, these people living like a fugitive,
Yeah, like people living like fugitives. It's so hard on your immune system to live under that constant state of stress, right?
Yeah.
So there's some balance to be struck, but I think the big takeaway from this, I hope the big takeaway from this event for a lot of people is a reminder that one, check your normalcy, and two, nobody's job is taking care of you.
Right.
That's just not anyone's job. Yeah. I've been rolling this thing over in my mind this week because We still have snow on the ground outside. I'm just finishing up the maple syrup season. So to put in perspective, today is the 30th of March. So in Maine and the foothills where I live, winter's not really ended. And I already have found my first black-legged tick, or what a lot of people call the deer tick. The one that here is about at least 50% of them are infected with Lyme disease. They are our primary vector for Borrelia infections. They come out now. They just didn't used to be this way. Never would even see one before, 15, 20 years ago, never would have seen a tick. Now it's a massive kind of silent epidemic. So before the snow is even melted, we're already having to check for ticks because of the potential, very high risk potential of contracting Lyme disease. I don't think my government's supposed to fix that or save me. I don't think my employer's job is to take care of me through that. Yeah. I don't think anybody's job is to prepare me for the threats that are in my environment, except my own job. Me and my family have to deal with that. Now, there's definitely some humor in the idea of Lyme and Corona. Due to the very popular beverage combination. But the idea is, you got Corona on one side, I got Lyme on the other side. The environment's full of threats. This is absolutely normal. It has always, when in history has been this peaceful?
Right.
When in history has been this affluent, right? So we're in this really sweet spot moment. Everything is unusually calm. This coronavirus is a reminder of what's actually more like baseline for living, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I love your analogy of it being a drill and then further extending that out, because we do live in such an affluent, peaceful society, more or less, right? And so the fact that, okay, here we are in this lockdown, this pandemic, we still got power, we still got food, we still got water, we're hanging out, and it really is that opportunity to take stock of one's life and begin to make shifts. And I've really appreciated watching you on your journey go further and further while still, maintaining that kind of reality of both feet in both, or foot in each world kind of thing, versus like, okay, I'm running, I'm a fugitive, I'm living off the land. It's like, right. It's like, and I'm the same. Like I've actually chosen to live in the city, to be with people in this environment versus, taking off to the hills kind of thing. We're all in this together. And so how do we make, steps, just as you've done, just as I'm doing, towards, more of a grounded reality, for things like, there's always some threat from our environment. We're not.
And there'll be more, right? There'll be more. There'll be worse ones. There'll be ones that aren't as bad. There'll probably be stacks of them in the future. I believe that this pandemic is not the last of this kind of thing we're going to hear about. And I don't just mean that there'll be reinfection and there'll probably be, another wave of this in the fall, as much as I mean in the way that there was, when I was a kid, there was terrorism. I mean, I remember occasionally there would be stories about plane hijackings and things like that. There were very few and far between. The compression between events now at this point, terror events around the world are so common that we don't hear about them all anymore. I mean, just, these things have increased. I think similarly, we're going to see emerging infectious disease be a problem. And I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that human beings have chosen to live like battery hens, like CAFO cows. You take a city, you look at a place like New York City, which is a cold and damp and fairly shadowy, dark city it's not Miami. It's not sunny and hot there. You've got whatever the metro is, 7 million people, maybe probably more, stacked and packed really, really tight. Very little species diversity, in the sense that you got a sprinkling of ginkgo trees and lapdogs. And otherwise, it's just all people living together, like a Monsanto cornfield, like, a Purdue chicken factory farm. And the problem with those chicken factory farms is that disease spreads rampantly through it for a whole bunch of reasons. One is because of the lack of biological normal conditions. In other words, space, sunlight, fresh air, all those kind of things. But then you also have the health of the animals themselves, because they are on unnaturally nutrition deficient diets. They are injected with a lot of either things that are growth, promoting, or things that are to knock back disease, which can help in acute situations, but chronically, actually really diminishes your ability to fight off infections. So you got all those kind of things. Well, we're really emulating that. I think something I've talked about a lot over the last decade is how in the quest to domesticate the world around us, we domesticated ourselves. How much more so now? I mean, you look at it, it's really ironic. I was thinking about it this morning. Domestication means of the house.
Yeah.
How do you get more domesticated than quarantine? Talk about of the house, right?
Wow.
We're deep in it right now, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we have created these conditions. And then additionally, as we cut back, as we mow the lawn of the ecosystem, so to speak, and push further and further in to places where people just haven't really been in contact with, you know, both large and small fauna, but also all the organisms that live in them. We're starting to get exposed to these emerging viruses and bacteria. So, and that's not even touching any of the, I'm talking about pure party line dynamics here. I am not touching around the edges of bioweapons and those kind of things, like those types of emerging infections. So I think we're going to keep encountering this. So my point being, I guess to wrap a bow on that, is I wouldn't be surprised if in our lifetimes we have many more events like this, some smaller and maybe some worse. So in the same way that after 9/11 took place, you know, being a US citizen, my whole life changed after that dramatically. And I'm sure in Canada, you felt it too. It's like, you still got to take your shoes off when you get on an airplane now. The world changed. Well, the world's going to change from this event. 9/11 was a local and regional thing. This is worldwide. I mean, the weirdest thing to me here has been that no matter where I talk to somebody in any country I talk to them, I know there are places that are unaffected. I don't have friends in those places. But wherever I'm talking to people, they're going through this too. So the world's going to be a different place. Our social behavior and dynamics is going to be different. Companies are going to rise and fall. I mean, there's going to be a major turnover here. And then afterward, I think what we just need to be prepared for, in the same way we were with terrorism, or school shootings would be an example. I remember Columbine really, really clearly in my mind. I know there was other ones before, but I was too young. I was essentially offline at that time.
Yeah.
After Columbine, it was like, bam, 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 right? Schools, movie theaters, churches, like this stuff has ratcheted up. So I would just expect the medical side to do the same thing. So that's the world you live in. Be thankful you don't have barbarian hordes coming in to plunder your people, right? Be grateful you don't have a conquering, you know, civilization coming in to claim your lands. Like, people have lived through much worse times. Like, not being able to get your frappuccino is not like the, right? I mean, this is, people are like losing their minds, and it's like, man, this is actually really not that bad. This is, you're living in quarantine better than many kings lived 6,000 years ago.
Yeah, no, for
you know,
sure.
I mean, put it in perspective, but I do think we're entering into a changing world. So I guess my big kind of advice here is how we do it here in my house. I don't like put away big stores of beans because I don't eat beans. Right. I mean, I eat beans, but I mean, I don't eat a lot of beans, right? So it's not like a normal thing that I'm eating a lot of. So I don't go out and buy a bunch of that. I'd rather go out and buy what I already eat.
Yeah.
Put away a lot of that, so there's no interruption to my life, if that makes sense. Storing up the things that we already use. And I think for a lot of people, this would be that assessment I was talking about. It's like, many people probably never thought about how much toilet paper they go through, but now they're thinking about it, right? I saw a meme the other day about how back in the day, used to roll toilet paper off there like it was the, like, what are they saying, like Wheel of Fortune.
Oh yeah.
That wheel spinning. Right now it's like partitioning off like their little postage stamps, you know?
Yeah.
I think people are realizing, like, oh, if I have to, you know, 1 to 3 months of not having access to the things that I need, it would be smart to just start living with that buffer.
Right.
Because it could be, I mean, I remember, Malcolm, you guys having that flood out there. Just
totally.
A localized Armageddon for you guys, right?
Yeah.
Small regional, but it's like everything from the, you know, friends in California who've got to leave their house because it's the hillside's on fire, to friends in Calgary whose places are underwater, to friends in the Keys who had to flee because the hurricanes ripped their roof off. I mean, this stuff is happening all the time too.
Yeah.
On top of that, we have these other kinds of threats. So I think there's a way to balance and be like a very fun-loving, happy, positive, contributing person on one hand, and also be ready to run and gun on the other hand, so that you kind of, you're capable no matter what how the environment changes.
Yeah, amazing. And just for context, like I know here in Calgary, it's been a bit of a joke that like, okay, people are making this run on toilet paper. Like there is actually still some here in Calgary, but where you are in Maine, you're actually there is a shortage. Like
You know
everyone's.
what's funny? We went out last night to the grocery store.
Yeah,
I mean, it was challenging for me, to be honest. I had we were buying some sponges, and this it's like a self checkout now.
yeah.
This little side tangent. I love that you pay to do your own work at the checkout now. It's like, what the hell, man? Right? It's like, oh, we don't have to pay an employee, but you're going to pay the same amount. It's like, great.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm at the self checkout and the alarm goes off. We have too many sponges. It's like,
What?
yeah, because they're rationing out cleaning supplies, And
Right.
then, so we couldn't, after the sponges, we couldn't buy any more cleaning supplies. We had to do like a separate transaction. It's this whole story. And the shelves, like a lot of them are totally full, right? Depends what the product is. Other products completely cleaned out. So some aisles just empty. In the toilet paper and paper towel aisle, they now had a few products of some kind of brand I've never seen before, some
Right.
like really low end brand that's never on those shelves. I don't know where they found this stuff, like some salvage stuff. So it's starting to creep back in slowly. But the thing that I really took away from it was it looked more like when I've traveled in developing countries.
Right.
I don't know what the right word for that is. We used to say third world. I think that's kind of gotten a little gross to say. I don't know if developing nations is the right word for that, but places that I've been, on several continents where you're just like, this is just the normal,
Yeah.
right? But to us, it looks a little dingy and a little understocked because of what we're used to in a ridiculous abundance. Now, one of the things that I find this like toggle in ourselves is we have that normalcy bias. We want the world to stay how we're used to it being, what we
Yeah.
think of as correct or normal. And then we also know that here in the West, Canada, the States, we live in a very insustainable way. So if it's insustainable, then it has to eventually change because it can't be sustained. I think people miss that. I know what I said is really obvious there, but I don't think everybody always really gets it. If
Yeah.
your lifestyle is not sustainable, then it will stop.
Yeah. Well, and
Right?
an event like this really shows the fragility of that. It's like, okay, great, the trucks made it back to Costco with more toilet paper, but there's a very good chance, they couldn't have, or they won't in future.
There's a fantastic show came out in, I guess it would have been in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, probably early 2000s, called Jericho. It's like a 1.5 season show. And it was about an event that was nuclear in nature. But anyway, it's a show, like a series, and really walks you through the kind of things that could happen as things break down and as normalcy is restored. Anyway, there's one kind of joke in it where there's a millennial kid who's just like, I know what we need to do. We just need to get the internet back. Then we can just order stuff, And it's like, that's what's funny to me is people haven't thought through. It's like how the supply chain actually works. And so anyway, yeah, back to your point. If it's not sustainable, it's got to end. And being in the supermarket yesterday, I felt this like, this is hopefully and probably isn't the end of our lifestyle and as we grew up in it.
Yeah.
But it certainly shows that we aren't going to do it forever. It's a reminder that we're not going to do it forever. And that the way many other nations look to us is how we might end up looking at some point.
Yeah.
And so it was a real wake up call in that regard too, and having shortages in our country is just not something that I'm used to. I'm used to being heaped under piles of abundance.
Right. Yeah.
So
No, for sure.
I think this is a good, it's the austerity that we're feeling right now is good I think it's good for us. And the stress we're feeling, this is what I was trying to say before. I think that the stress feels really toxic to everybody, but this is actually not an abnormal amount of stress.
Right.
This is actually normal for humans. So we have this thing in the tactical world. We talk about these threat color indexes. So we'll have this thing where like threat level white, like I'm asleep or I'm getting a massage. Like
Right.
I'm not thinking about, I feel zero threat. I'm totally relaxed. Threat level yellow is like normal, alert. I'm walking down the street. There's no obvious threats, but I am aware that I could be hit by a car or something. So I'm aware. Orange is where I have identified a threat, but it might not be a threat to me. Like, I don't like how that person's acting, but I'm not, about to throw down. Threat level red is like, oh man, it's on, right?
Yeah.
It's on. okay, being in threat level yellow, orange is normal. But in our culture, everybody with earbuds walking around like nothing could ever happen to them, that's not normal. So a lot of people have gotten into, especially because we have such like maybe that was normal for a yogi in a cave.
Right.
And because like those kind of paradigms have reached the West in our time of outrageous abundance, and we've gotten into those kind of spiritual traditions here, we've gotten into this idea that that's normal. Now, as a hunter out in the environment, I see the threat level that animals live under.
Yeah.
Not threat level white,
No.
right? Not at all. And you can't you can't try to use a squirrel in a park as an example for yourself, or a pigeon in a park, because that's not how they behave. Try hunting pigeons out where pigeons live wild. Try hunting squirrels where squirrels live wild. They don't walk up and eat out of your hand. They are very aware of you as a predator. So they're getting picked off all the time. So that's actually our environment. We always lived in that. So while I think it's nice to be able to go to white and as often as possible and as often as we can, so that we can renew our nervous system, just like ultimately, if you just looked at what happened when I was lifting weights, you'd be like, hey, that's not good for you. You're ripping up your body, man. You're putting a lot of strain on your joints. It's a lot of gravity. But then you look at the long-term benefit, you're like, oh, I see. That's actually good for you long-term. It makes you more resilient, increases your muscle mass, all that stuff, your strength, all of that. Similarly, living under this kind of stress is intense when you're not used to it. But I do think it makes us more aware, more resilient, clear about our environment. And once you get through that panic phase that comes from the fact that you're not used to it and you actually get into the rhythm, you start to actually make better decisions like, hey, maybe I shouldn't think about just having 2 days worth of food in my house.
Yeah.
Or maybe I should think a little bit more about how I keep the security around my house. I mean, if you're going to basically let prisoners out of jail, because of quarantine, it's like, that's going to have an impact on some people's safety and lives, right? Like you want to think about those things. We've just gotten so soft from the incredibly cushy living that we've gone through, and really what's only been a couple of generations, because when was the Great Depression?
Yeah.
Early 1900s, right? So the last pandemic, a real pandemic, 1918, 1919, right? I always heard 50 million people dead. Now they're saying 70 to 90 million people died in that worldwide. Yeah. So it's just been a long time. We've gotten pretty comfortable with this kind of easy living. So I do think that this is represents part of the end of that, even though we might recover from this round of it a lot more than we might recover nearly fully, but I don't think we will recover fully. And I think that we're going to see changes to our lifestyle in our lifetimes. And if we want to stop this sixth extinction event, we know we have to change anyway, right?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I fully agree. It's, part of me, every once in a while, it goes to the possibility of like, okay, this is it. This is the economic collapse. This is like, everything's about to change. And, and then I come back to, no, probably not. But it's somewhere in the middle, right? And it is this opportunity. So, I know we didn't really have a plan of where we're going with this interview. And I love the kind of the ground that we've laid so far. Maybe let's talk about, how people can make those steps, right? Like whether it's that wake up call to like, oh my gosh, like I don't even have, 2 days worth of food, to maybe moving towards where you're at. Like we had interviewed a friend of mine, Tico Tacoan, who's big on kind of the permaculture and the farming and, kind of creating resilient food systems. And I feel like myself, I'm kind of in between that world and your world, where I don't really envision myself as a farmer, but I can meddle in the gardening, and I'm really into planting more food trees, like enhancing our own local foodscape. And most people in the city, it would be a combination of foraging and hunting and gardening. I think because of the density of where we're at, we're going to need to rely on that. And so how do we begin to make that bridge? This is something that you've been making that transition over the last, as long as I've known you, like more than 10 years type of thing.
Yeah, that's true. So you've kind of we've witnessed each other's journeys a lot over the years. Well, I want to say I don't really believe in any kind of one size fits all. Like any good task force that's put together is composed of people with multiple different skill sets so that you have a really well-rounded team.
Right.
And in that regard, I think that we need people who do kind of all different things. So it's not like we want everybody to be hunting or everybody to be farming or any kind of one of those things. But you, myself, and the community of people that we've been connected with have all been pursuing different avenues around these same ideas of human beings living in a new kind of balance on the earth, right? That's been our primary interest, I think, because we perceived that the world would eventually change. It was that mathematic I talked about earlier, which is really simple. If it's not sustainable, it has to change. Therefore, how do I position myself for the change, either so that maybe I die before the real transition, but I become a stepping stone for the next generation's journey into it, or 2 generations out, or whatever it takes. And I pursue it anyway because it's my passion. Or maybe it does happen in our lifetime and we've been doing that work. And I also think, so there's that one piece. I think I like the idea of people diversifying into where their passions and interests take them, rather than just trying to follow some specific journey. The other thing is like, it's just like investing, or it's just like driving a car. Like when you drive a car, you got to think about your risk profile. Some people are like, I'm very comfortable to drive 30 kilometers over the speed limit. Some people are like, that's crazy, I do the speed limit. Some people go like, oh, I'm comfortable 5 or 10 over because I will almost never get pulled over, right? So there's sort of, you determine your risk profile, right? So it's like that, like how much prepping do you want to do, or how deep you want to go in this lifestyle has a lot to do with your personality type, how you perceive threats, and all of that kind of stuff. So my personal strategy, I've been very interested in wildness, as probably some of the folks listening know. And for those who don't, that's been my real interest over the years, is human wildness versus domestication. And that led me to go real deep into foraging and hunting and fishing and things like that. So while I really appreciate my friends who do permaculture and grow some of the food that we supplement with here, that's not as exciting to me. What's exciting to me is to go out into wild landscapes, or I say wild landscapes, we don't really have a lot of those really, but on the fringes of civilization, so to speak, where there are wild critters that I can bring home to the table. So, my journey looked like, and I think this would be good for everybody, would be like, sign up for it once you can be around people again. Right now is a tough one because everybody's kind of it's like musical chairs or something. It's like, you just got to like sit tight right now. There's not a lot you can do. Right? You can get some stuff off Amazon and blah, blah, blah. But one thing I want to point out too is that a real skill set always trumps gear every time, right? And so there's a tendency for people to think it's about having stuff. I saw a funny little video the other day. It was a guy saying, it's like, from his point of view, what do you call that? A POV video, right? Through his perspective. And he's looking at toilet paper, paper towels, canned food, all this stuff, milk on his counter. And the video starts off with him saying, yeah, it's amazing. I went in the grocery store. There was nothing on the shelves. I came out and this guy had a fully stocked cart. He was on his way to his car. And I just asked him politely, hey, could I have some of that stuff? And you wouldn't believe it. And now you start seeing his hand and he's holding the pistol. He's like, he gave me some milk. He gave me some paper towels. He gave me some toilet paper. It's like, just because you have stuff doesn't mean you actually get to keep your stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Just because you have stuff is great. You want to have it. But you really want the skill set that allows you to recreate your life no matter how you end up, or where you end up, or what you end up with. Because you could have your bunker in prepper paradise stashed with everything, and a major event happens and you're on the subway in New York and no way to get home. Like, what do you know what I mean? You got to have skills.
Right.
I think for like some of the stuff that I'm interested in, the place for a lot of people to start is with a hunter safety course, is to find somebody who hunts, who can take you out and teach you a little bit about it, to find somebody who fishes for a thing that you would actually want to eat and learn and go out and do that, to find a foraging workshop or a plant walk. I know in Calgary, you guys are connected to that world, and like get out and learn some stuff. And my approach is species by species. So I don't really like the idea of, I'm going to try to learn to fish. It's like, that is a very big world with a lot of disciplines and a lot of gear sets and a lot of species you pursue, and some stuff that for me is not food. Some stuff that is food. What's more important is you learn how to do a thing. So it's like, I'm going to teach you to fish for Atlantic mackerel, and then bring that mackerel home, and we're going to cut it and vacuum seal it, cook it, all that stuff. So you learn an actual beginning to end skill rather than about fishing. Same with hunting. Like, I wouldn't really want to say like, I'm going to learn to hunt. It's like, what? Like squirrels? That's one discipline. Turkeys, another discipline. Deer, whole other discipline. Bears, whole other discipline. So if you can get somebody who to walk you through and hold your hand through one particular discipline, again, start to finish, field to table. And the same with foraging. Again, it's not like there, as you know, there's no rules like, well, if it's green and has a entire margin and it's April, you can eat it. There's no rules like that. So you got to learn like each plant individually. So it's kind of like if you went out and learned one animal, let's say one mammal or bird, one fish, and one plant this season, boy, you'd be in a lot better position than most people. And the nice thing, I like skills that are useful or fulfilling in good times and bad. Really? So what I like about these things I'm talking about is in good times, they connect me to landscapes, they connect me to species, they increase my exposure to that diversity we were saying is lacking in the city. Not just physical diversity, but like a mental diversity of knowing that, oh, these creatures are here. Yeah. They're not as scarce as like the environmentalists make me feel like, it's all gone. It's like, it's not all gone. Actually go out there. And most of those people are in cities who are talking about how bad it is out there. Like go out and actually see, learn where these things live and learn about yourself through that process. So in good times, it's super edifying. Mm-hmm. And in bad times, everybody's like, Daniel, can I come live with you? Because you know how to do that stuff. Or whatever.
And in bad times, and in bad times, I mean, like talk about like the most amazing therapy, right? Like to go out now and like tap your maple trees, or to go harvest like poplar buds. You know, the world out there in nature is continuing, and it's very grounding and it's very soothing to be in that environment. To go, here's my rhythm, here's my routine. You know, like there's some normalcy here, and you know, you're literally being fed in that way as well.
Yeah, when I named our brand Wild Fed, I was thinking about kind of the idea, first of all, of like a grass-fed cow or something like that, like fed by wild food, but also how it feeds and nourishes us on other levels too, being fed by wildness. And to your point, and that's something, you know, we were talking about the other day, is like there is no shortages in the wild environment right now. There's no pause, no delay, nothing's on lockdown. It's all unfolding just like last year and the year before and the year before and the year before. The phenology or the calendar of nature doesn't change because people are having a crisis. I bottled up my last maple syrup, I think of the season yesterday. Something happens toward the end where you get what's called a buddy flavor. You start to get this green vegetal flavor in the sap when the buds start to open on the maples. And you can taste these phenochemicals or these phytochemicals. And then when you concentrate the sap by cooking it down, you get more of it. And it's like, it's not bad, but it's not commercially valuable anymore, you know? And it's kind of how you know it's time to wrap it up. So we did that yesterday and we ended at just over 8 gallons of maple syrup. That'll last my wife and I through the whole year. So while this is all going on and the shelves are emptied out and people are trying to figure out how long this is going to go on, and, you know, okay, maybe stuff is trickling into the stores, but you got to like weigh whether or not you want to go out there and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, without even leaving our dooryard, we've been able to make all the sugar we need for the year. So those kind of things too, it's interesting. I'm developing a relationship with my landscape. So all that's happening. And that's one benefit. I'm outside while everybody's like, part of why people are losing their mind is they're inside. And I keep pointing out, hey, you can go outside, but I forget that a lot of people live in the heart of a city where getting into nature means somehow getting out of the city. So, you know, that's a lot to how to do, you know, with where you position yourself too. But for us, we're able to just kind of go out and do these things. I'll be able to go turkey hunting this year. There'll be no challenges based on logistics. So yeah, and in the process, we are filling our house with all the stuff that we need. Now, this has been really interesting. My wife is from Montreal, so she grew up in the city, and she grew up in an environment where every day you go out to get fresh bread or you go out to get a fresh croissant, like from the bakery. They got up that morning at 3 a.m. and started baking. And it's like, that's the culture, that French infused culture. You go get your groceries for that night, that day. Right. That's like the lifestyle she grew up in. So when she moved here with me, you know, it was like for her a bit strange, like the way that I would store things up or the way that I would want to go for our groceries like once a week or every 2 weeks, or that wasn't like her. But it's been interesting since this started, her going like, you know, yesterday she says to me like, babe, we got to start cutting our own firewood. Right. Like, wow. You know, it's really interesting to watch that shift take place that I think is happening for a lot of people as they realize, hey, you know, some of this living isn't really that sustainable. And I think her experience the last couple of years has been the more of this stuff she's participated in. Because when we first got together, she was living in Montreal and commuting, and we went through the immigration process. And finally, like, you know, last year she landed here with a green card, and now she's really getting to settle into kind of a lot of these practices. And the more she does, the more like something changes in you as you start to interact with wild land, wild places, wild species, that makes you want to do it, even if there's never a crisis. Right. And if there is a crisis, and I think that's what they call anti-fragility, right?
Right.
So robust would be like you're strong. Resilient would be like you bounce back. Anti-fragile means as things get worse, the things that you have or the skills that you have make you prosper at a level beyond where most people can prosper. So you're actually set up to thrive in collapse, not just survive in a collapse. Now, again, I'm not trying to use super strong language. I know this isn't a collapse, but it's a fire drill for a collapse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I think having skills that are useful, you know, knowing where there are resources in your environment's really smart, knowing where there's spring water.
Yeah. And like you say, I think it's, you know, we owe it not only to ourselves, but future generations. If we just continually, you know, give up skills and ways of living that, you know, have allowed people to survive throughout time, we're putting our whole, you know, lineage and the entire, you know, species at risk, you know, in that sense.
Yeah. And I want to add to that, because something I don't hear being discussed very much, I'm kind of surprised why. This isn't my area, so it's why I haven't brought it up a lot, but I'm surprised I'm not hearing much about it. And that is that what is the impact of losing our elders, you know?
Right.
Because you got a generation of people who are like my friend Lawrence is 71. And he grew up, he always tells me, Dan, when I was a kid, the only thing we bought was flour and sugar. Everything else we grew, hunt, or fished. You know, he grew up that way. But he's like, that's the last generation that really grew up like that. So as those people both die from natural causes, but also from, you know, issues like this, like COVID-19, which is predominantly taking our elders, we're left with a generation who not only doesn't remember what communism was actually like and what socialism really did to the world, right? You got this generation of people who are very quick to embrace political ideologies that were a plague to humanity that have been sort of restored because people have forgot. So that's like one side, but also people who understood where things came from because they worked the land with their hands. So those skills being lost, who remember a world before there was 7 billion people, and those fundamental things that are human that are just getting like slipping away, like all that's being lost. And one thing that's kind of scary to me is such an ungrounded generation inheriting the world unnaturally quickly.
Right.
You know, and when I say scary, I don't mean like can't sleep at night, but I mean like there are implications to losing the people who remember a life way. So back to what you were just saying, and I guess why I was saying it in the first place. It's important that those of us who feel called to, like I said before, we all got to diversify based on what our strengths and our passions are. But there are certain things that if they're lost, they could be lost in one generation.
Yeah. No,
and that doesn't mean we don't have the ingenuity to recreate them, but it's a lot easier if you don't have to start from scratch. Yeah. So if your thing is like, for whatever reason, I am drawn to learning how to weave baskets. You know, I've done some classes on that. That is not my thing. I just don't care enough. But I want people to keep that alive. Or, you know, my friend Arthur makes bows, and I've made a bow with him. It took me a week. I think the bow is amazing, but I hunt with firearms. So it's not my passion, but I want that to stay alive. Like, I think all these arts that are our fundamental human arts are more important. I always joke they're more important than Civil War reenactments. They're more important than medieval fair reenactments. Like, if we're going to reenact that stuff, we need people who reenact the actual, you know, the Renaissance blouses and, you know, the throwing hatchets was not how we survived for 300,000 years in our current form, right? There is a skill set that got us through that, and people are not very invested in keeping that alive. And I think that's a mistake because it's a mistake in the same way of walking out into the woods and not keeping a track of how you got there.
Right.
You want to have your breadcrumb trail that leads you back to where you started. And I don't think we should quickly sever the line back. And it's very easy in like peacetime to forget.
Oh, totally.
That's the thing, right? So, and I was telling you about that the other day, that I was starting to get to that level of complacency in my own life. I've lived a very intentionally prepared lifestyle and a self-sufficient lifestyle for my whole life. And I was growing complacent. Things were just too easy and good here. Yeah. And then right as I was sort of inching my way into like, why do I do all this stuff? Bam, this like out of nowhere black swan event strikes. And so it was a reminder to me. So if it's easy for me who already is into that stuff, how easy is it for people to become complacent? Very easy. And so I hope that the people who feel drawn to these things pursue it. And I think that that's one of the things that's going to come out of this anyway, naturally, is that a lot of people are going to want to learn, not just watch it on TV, but actually want to learn, you know?
Yeah. And this is such a, like it's a big enough event. It's going to retain in our memory, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting watching, because you mentioned about the flood in Calgary, and you know, some people were affected, some people weren't, and it's interesting to see those houses kind of come and go on the market, and you know,
you were describing it to me the other day about how it was like you could go up the hill in some places and it's not even happening.
Right.
That's what's powerful about this one, is that it's a pretty equal opportunity employer, right? It just seems like, you know, I do think that I know that there are nations where this is hardly making an impact, and that's one of the interesting things, that mostly that's in nations that don't have I don't want to say standard of living, the quality of living that we have.
Right.
This is where it's really impacting people is in places where they're used to really living off the fat of the earth.
Yeah. Modern industrialized nations, you know?
Yeah. So we're going to retain this one, but just like 1918 and 1919, I was thinking about it last night. Like, who's old enough to remember that? No one.
Yeah. Well, when my dad was saying, he was listening to a show and some commentators were talking about that, where there wasn't a lot of cultural memory, you know, back to that. And one of the reasons is that during that time, people actually didn't like how they behaved. So culturally, we just kind of like swept that under the rug.
Can you say more?
You know, like when it got to that type of an extreme scenario, like things got ugly, right? And in contrast, people didn't like how they behaved, so they didn't really talk about that time. It was tough times, it was stressful times. They acted out of, you know, yeah.
I did a online course with a guy. He had lived through civil war in Yugoslavia.
Right.
And he was trapped for 1 year in a city under siege.
Wow.
And he describes quite graphically many of the things that took place there, and many things that he did and people he knew did. And he talked about people who were bankers, people who were lawyers, people who were doctors, who were becoming kind of like gang leaders, warlords, thieves, murderers.
Yeah.
You know, and he talked about how you didn't really know the character of a person until those kind of things happened. And then you saw what somebody actually was like when there was no rule of law. I mean, they were essentially lawless for a year and you know, fighting for every scrap of food they had. I mean, it's really horrifying. I don't think that's going to happen. I want to clarify.
Yeah, for sure.
But those things have happened and do happen. Also, so I could see, I guess in that regard, why you'd want to like not remember some of that. Also, any of us who grew up around people who had been in the Depression, the Great Depression, very different type of person. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's like, you ever like start writing in a notebook and not like the way your handwriting turned out on that page and just tear the whole page out and throw it or something, you know? Yeah. People who live through the Depression do not do that, right? It's like every scrap of everything was saved. The imprint of the lack that they went through was so traumatic that they could not, even though everything had rebounded, they were so marked by it. I think some of that might happen, where some people might be affected enough by this that they will fundamentally be different in how they approach resources. But anyway, back to 1918, 1919. So what, if you were 102 years old, you could have been born then, but to be old enough, there's nobody alive old enough to have a memory of that. Yeah. So I think this event, let's say nothing else happens for a while, you know, you could see how after some time you forget again. And so I think a big part of this is the reminder, the wake up call, whatever is actually going on. I think one of the challenges for us is we don't really know what's going on at the highest billionaire level, but the discussions that are happening, we don't know what's going on behind closed doors with, you know, the top military brass, discussions with our prime ministers and presidents, what the briefings that they're having at the WHO, all that. Like, none of us on the ground level are ever really going to know. We're only going to get the trickle down that it has been. And I don't mean this in a conspiracy way. It's just like, if you're the CEO of Coca-Cola, your guys bottling on the plant floor don't know what's going on in the board meetings. Why would all they get is the trickle down distilled that is made for the working class people who are in that operation. So similarly, we can't know. And so in that way, again, it's chop wood, carry water. I don't know what's really going on here. I don't know what the projections are telling them. I don't know why sometimes our politicians come out looking real scared about this.
Right.
I noticed this trend already, watching them look pretty comfortable, like, hey, this isn't a big deal. Then other days they look real freaked out, you know, and all I can do is read body language. I don't know what's going on, what they know or don't know, or what they're worried about. So all I can do is show up each day, try not to let this like radically alter who I am as a person, and try to continue to do my work. Just chop wood, carry water, right? How then shall we live? So, you know, ultimately it'll be interesting historically to look back, because I'm sure more and more stuff will come out and we'll learn more about the origin of this and why this happened and how it got out of control and all of that. But for right now, you know, it's like, be good to each other. I've had some weird run-ins with people in town in the last few days where people were really out of their minds and dangerously so. Dude hit me with his car the other day,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and then got out yelling at me. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. So people are kind of, you know, mentally and emotionally trying to come to terms with a new reality. So I think, you know, being good people, showing up, being resourceful, being leaders in our community, supporting each other. You know, I've been on a lot more phone calls recently with a lot of people I haven't talked to in a long time. Everybody's just checking in. All that stuff's really, really important. And, you know, we're really blessed in that we haven't lost comms. You know, we have phones, we have internet. Like, imagine if you couldn't get any news or any communications out, like how you would be behaving right now, right? It's a very different thing. So we have solid infrastructure. This isn't like a natural disaster which can take out the grid or anything like that. So everything's actually pretty good. I mean, we have fairly sustained food, all that kind of, everything is pretty good. So I think, like I said, fire drill opportunity to assess your life and ask yourself, like, how do you want to position yourself going forward? Because there's a lot of people. One thing I heard recently, somebody was talking about their grandfather had immigrated from Sweden, I think, and he was a carpenter, did fine carpentry work. Well, when he got here, immigrants weren't really welcome in the industry, so he had to find something else to do, became a farmer, and then the Great Depression hit. Right. And he had bankers who were very, very wealthy before the collapse of the economic system, who were coming to him to work 50 cents a day farming as his operation expanded, and he started to become quite wealthy because he produced food. Yeah. But he said a lot of these bankers really didn't own anything except a wool suit. And that was about all they actually owned. So you've got a lot of people who've created a lot of financial numeric wealth, but actually don't have any physical wealth.
Right.
Whatever that means for you, right? It's like you could have, you know, $100 million in the bank, but like be living out of Ubers and renting Airbnbs and globe trotting and all that kind of stuff. And you don't actually have a place to go, people to be with, food put away, or any of that, right? So, and there are people who don't have a lot in the system, but who have a lot of those things. Yeah. And so, you know, you got to decide what's your risk profile and where do you want to start positioning yourself for the next time this happens, and make sure that your plan includes it potentially not happening again too.
Yeah, no, for sure. Love that. Love where this discussion has gone to. It feels very empowering, and feels like for those that are watching, if you're hearing the call, you know, develop those skill sets, begin to assess that risk profile and how we want to move forward. Some people are in, you know, what might seem like a very, you know, scary and challenging position. Maybe they've lost their job. To, you know, reframe this as an opportunity to kind of recreate, redefine yourself. As you were talking, that reminds me of a story of a guy who now lives in Ecuador. So he was an Italian psychotherapist. He was, you know, I think it was back in the 60s. He was traveling through Ecuador. There was some sort of like political upheaval in the country, you know, total lockdown. And he ended up getting stuck in this one little tiny coastal town for 2 weeks, at least minimum, couldn't move. And in that moment, he actually fell in love with the land, the people, and most particularly the Palo Santo tree. And he's continued to stay there. He basically, like, he didn't even return home to Italy. Like, he just stayed there. And he's been a steward of the Palo Santo trees, re-educating the people around its, medicinal and spiritual properties. And he's been reforesting the dry coastal rainforest of Ecuador. And it's like, wow, what a story. And I think
cool, man. That's cool, because that you're bringing in another axis there, which is like a spiritual axis, which is that, your destiny doesn't go on hold because of this. It's right. This is part of your destiny.
Yeah.
Like your personal journey for self-edification and growth, and for that of your loved ones and your family, your passions, all the things you're meant to do in the world. Like this is just part of that. So how you move through it is how you end up getting to those places. And so probably a lot of people will discover themselves through this. Yeah. A lot of people will discover their true passions and true callings and where they're really supposed to be, and a lot of good is going to come out of this. It's hard right now, but it's I think the more we can remember to be grateful, it's like I started this year with a gratitude notebook in the morning. I do like a meditation and a gratitude thing, which I really need because I'm a highly adrenalized person, and I can be pretty dark in certain ways. And remembering how blessed I am and really feeling that gratitude, not just writing it down, but like taking the moment to feel it. Yeah. And what's neat to me is that all that's still there even while this is going on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, and I know, like, some people have, like you said, there's a lot of people losing jobs, a lot of people losing money, a lot of people who's probably are not used to spending this much time with their significant other, and maybe realizing they're not with the person that they actually really want to be with. I mean, there's a lot of that all kinds of things are going on,
Yeah.
It's all opportunity, man. It's all just a really great opportunity to really make sure you're where you want to be.
Yeah. And into what's quote unquote the buzzword right now, what's essential, right? We're stripping back down to like essential services. Yeah.
Well, that's so good. Life close to the bone. I love that idea. One of the great things about like survival skills and all that is you start to like, okay, there's this idea. I always laugh about this, but I see the value in it. Survival skill classes and stuff, they often assume this thing, like you're naked in the woods. You have nothing. It's like, how would that happen to me? Why would that ever happen to me? Yeah. But the idea is your skills trump what you have. So it's a good stand-in for this. Like I'm the, I have all this stuff, and then I find myself in another place and this happens. Like, how do you start over, right? Like, how do you start from scratch? Like, what do you actually need? And it's not that much, and it's all out there.
Yeah.
And I love, something I like to joke about David Wolf, because I think he's kind of a kook, but I grew up around him and worked around him. He's zany for sure. One of the things that he said that really stuck with me, I don't know where he got it, but he always said everything you need is always within 50 feet.
Right.
And we would do this game sometimes around him where it'd be like, we'd need something, and we'd create like a 50-foot perimeter and just search, and you'd find like inevitably something that fills the role of what you need.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That kind of a game, so good for the head. It's like what's essential is usually much closer than you think, but people are just stuck in thinking like the only use for the spoon is to eat with.
Right.
Yeah. You know what I mean? It's cool when you start to look at how you can leverage what you already have, not just physical things, mental technologies, friendships, all these kind of things, your money. Like, how can you use it differently than you've thought of using it before? And that being stripped down to the bone gives you that opportunity. So yeah, like, I guess my big takeaway from today's conversation is it's like, you are in an opportunity right now. Reframe it for yourself. This is an opportunity. People are going to get wealthy during this. People are going to be happy during this. People are going to find love during this. People are going to have babies during this. Like, all kinds of opportunities are like, don't get into the mindset everything's lost, because for many of us, everything's being found right now.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, this has been the most uplifting, inspiring, empowering conversation, definitely of my whole time in this pandemic. So, yeah, thank you. I'm feeling that gratitude, and it was wonderful to connect. So, before we sign off, I want to usually I ask people, kind of what's your hope for society that comes out of this. I think that was our whole entire conversation. Which is awesome. So let's finish off with let people know how they can find you. I know you've always got some great, exciting projects. You've got some stuff in the past people can dig through, but I know one thing especially that's current right now, which relates to everything we've just been talking about, is your WildFed series.
Yeah, so I've made a show called WildFed. It's a TV show. I self-produced it. And we've made the first episode free. So if you go to wild-fed.com, find the first episode, 30-minute episode. The podcast as well, WildFed, really cool. We talk to usually people who are either, who hunt, fish, forage, are experts in those fields, or maybe are in, sort of biologists, regulators, stuff like that. All comes back to this idea of our relationship to ecosystems, but those are deep dives, man. They're pretty eye-opening. And my company, Surthrival, we definitely have some products that fit the bill right now. Our colostrum, our medicinal mushroom formulas, our vitamin D formula, those things are selling like crazy right now because people are realizing like, hey, I need to, tune up my immune system. So those are my projects, surthrival.com, wild-fed.com. And then you can find me at Daniel Vitalis on Instagram.
Okay, right on. Thanks a lot, Daniel.
Thanks,
well, once the flights are flying again,
exactly.
Bring you back to Calgary one of these years. So
I love that. Yeah.
Love that. Cool. Well, it was an absolute pleasure to chat with you. And stay well, you and Ivani, and keep thriving out there in Maine.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
Okay, right on.
Really hope you enjoyed that interview. Be sure to subscribe to make sure that you are receiving notifications of all the videos coming out. And if you want access to the entire video series, something that you can replay, you can share with friends and family, then definitely make sure you take advantage of the offer to get access to all of that. And thank you again for being part of this community and this series called Community Immunity.